Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Summer Guest Speaker Series brought to you by the University of San Diego's Jacobs Institute for Innovation in Education. We're so happy you could join us today. Please tell us hello in the chat. Let us know where you're attending from. If you want to show your face, you can. If you want to just turn off your camera, that's all right too. We're just happy to have you with us. We got someone from Vegas. Wonderful. We have our executive director, Lisa Dolly here. Wonderful. It's nice to see all of you. We're super excited to have with us Dr. Keith Sawyer, Distinguished Professor of Educational Innovations at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And we're looking forward to his presentation today entitled The Creative Classroom. We also have a virtual book signing opportunity, compliments of our partnerships with Barnes & Noble. We have with us Mary Meyer, Business Development Manager of the San Diego region, who will tell you more about that opportunity later. They are also sponsoring 2 book giveaways to 2 lucky randomly selected attendees from today's session, and that will be announced in the follow-up email. Before Dr. Sawyer begins his talk, I'd like to share some background on our featured speaker. Dr. Keith Sawyer, a professor of education at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, studies creativity, learning, and collaboration. After receiving his computer science degree from MIT in 1982, he began his career with a 2-year stint designing video games for Atari. Dr. Sawyer was a principal at Keenan Systems Corporation, where he worked as a management consultant on innovation technologies. Since receiving his PhD in psychology, he has dedicated his career to research on creativity, collaboration, and learning. He has been a jazz pianist for over 40 years, that's a fun fact, and spent several years playing piano with Chicago improv theater groups. We see that creativity coming in. Dr. Sawyer has published 17 books and over 120 scientific articles. His research has even been featured on CNN, Fox News, Time, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NPR, and other media. A popular speaker, he lectures to corporations, associations, and universities around the world on creativity and innovation. So we have a very accomplished speaker with us today, and we are so happy to have you with us. And so at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you so much. And it's really an honor to be invited here. Thank you all for coming and listening to my talk about the creative classroom. That's the title of a book that I published in 2019. It's my take on what all of the research shows us about how to design classrooms that'll foster creativity in students, and then what sort of schools are going to foster that type of teaching and that type of classroom. Well, I always start with teaching and learning. I am a learning scientist as well as a creativity researcher, and my research is focused on teaching and learning for creativity. So when we're trying to teach for creativity, we always encounter a type of pedagogy that does not teach for creativity, and I'll call it instructionism. It gets called many other things, sometimes transmission and acquisition, instructionism. Basically, it's just instructing people, telling them things. But the way I like to think about it is what I call a cultural model. Instructionism is grounded in a set of beliefs about teaching and learning that a lot of us don't always talk about explicitly. It comes along with an assumption about what counts as knowledge. And the conception of knowledge in instructionism is that knowledge is a collection of facts and procedures, and they're static facts and procedures. Knowledge is something that's fixed, right? And it comes with another assumption about what the goal of schooling is. The goal of schooling is to get the facts and procedures into students' heads. So all of these assumptions that go with the cultural model, they all interact with each other and they reinforce each other. So you start with this conception of knowledge as static facts and procedures. Now your conception of teaching and learning is to get the facts and procedures into students' heads. And teachers, the role of teachers also has an assumption aligned with those first two, that teachers are the people who know the facts and procedures, they possess them, and their job is to transmit them to the students. So everything is driven by this conception of knowledge, right? And also the curriculum. Now, the curriculum also aligns with that conception of knowledge, that the simplest facts and procedures should be learned first, and then you gradually build up with greater and more complex combinations of the facts and procedures. And finally, assessment is fairly straightforward because all you have to do is count up the number of facts and procedures that have been transmitted into that learner's head. All of these assumptions together, I'm calling the cultural model of instructionism. And the problem with instructionism is that it doesn't lead to creativity. It gets you into what I call the coverage trap. And the coverage trap is this belief and the focus on covering as much material as possible. And coverage means as many facts and procedures as possible going into that student's head. This coverage trap leads to a lot of false beliefs about schooling, that schooling is more effective if you get more facts and procedures into someone's head, that education is better somehow if you cover more stuff, a broader number, a broader range of facts and procedures. So that's what I call the coverage trap. And it's grounded in this cultural model of instructionism. Now, the problem is that instructionism just doesn't work. And it's not just the pedagogy that doesn't work. It's the cultural model of instructionism that is not aligned with the way people learn. So I'm not just talking about pedagogy that doesn't work, right? I'm talking about a whole way of thinking about knowledge and learning that doesn't work. First of all, the knowledge acquired is relatively superficial. So you are learning stuff, you're learning facts and procedures, but that kind of knowledge is relatively superficial and you don't retain it anyway. You memorize a bunch of stuff. All the research shows that you forget it. I don't know exactly when, one day, 1 week, definitely by a month later, you've forgotten anything you memorized this way. You can't transfer what you've learned to new situations. You can't generalize it, this type of knowledge. You can't integrate different facts and procedure. You can't integrate pieces of knowledge together when you learn through this instructionist cultural model, and you can't work adaptively with that type of knowledge. Everything is driven by the conception of knowledge, right, as static facts and procedures. That knowledge is superficial, it's weak, you don't retain it, you can't transfer it to new situations, you can't notice connections among pieces of knowledge, and you can't work creatively with it. So this we know from decades of research that instructionism doesn't work. Lots of studies that show each of these things on my slide. Why are we still doing it? Well, you're not learning for creativity. We really should not be teaching using instructionism if we want students to learn for creativity. So I've been talking about a conception of knowledge that drives everything. And some learning scientists, we call that epistemology. So what is the nature of knowledge? What is creative knowledge? If knowledge isn't static facts and procedures, well, first of all, it's deeper conceptual understanding, whereas the conception of knowledge in instructionism is superficial, isolated facts and procedures. Creative knowledge is deep knowledge. It has an underlying conceptual framework. Creative knowledge is big knowledge. When I say small pieces of knowledge, I mean each fact is a tiny little thing. You can put it in one neuron in your brain, if you will. But creative knowledge is bigger chunks of knowledge. It's a bigger piece, a bigger combination of something that you're learning. Whereas in instructionism, you're learning very small pieces of things. Creative knowledge is deep knowledge and it's big knowledge. Creative knowledge is connected. All the things that you're learning are interrelated with each other. Whereas in instructionism, the static facts and procedures are compartmentalized. They're sitting there isolated. But creative knowledge, everything is connected into a dense network. The deep knowledge, the big knowledge, and it's connected with each other. Creative knowledge is flexible as opposed to static, right? So it's a conception of knowledge where knowledge is adaptable, it's fluid, it can change. So how do you get this kind of creative knowledge into a student's head? I guess the way I think about this, the reason why I keep emphasizing the form of knowledge is a finding of my research and other research, which is if all you teach students is this shallow knowledge, if all they learn are facts and procedures, then they have learned something, right? They've learned something that you might call knowledge. But what they've learned is not the kind of knowledge that will support creativity. So if students only learn this kind of knowledge, you can't get them to be creative with that knowledge. You can't just tack on a bunch of creativity training after 12 years of instructionism, because the knowledge that's been acquired is a superficial knowledge that does not support creative thinking. It does not support creativity. You have to teach creative knowledge, and that requires a fundamental transformation of pedagogy, of teaching, learning, and schooling. So what kind of pedagogy will get you to creative knowledge? It's a pedagogy that I call guided improvisation. And it's grounded in a lot of terms and concepts. Many of you will have heard of constructivism or children actively constructing their own understandings. So guided improvisation is all of those things. Just a new way of thinking about it based in my own research on improvisational performance. So I am a jazz pianist, and for most of my life, I have performed in bands with other musicians, and specifically improvisational bands, where the musicians are not performing from a written score, but they're making up the parts and improvising as they go along. It's an ensemble art form. I also started playing with improvisational theater groups in Chicago when I was in graduate school at University of Chicago. And this is a photo of one of the groups that I videotaped as part of my research. I started to tease apart what goes on between people when they're improvising together. What are those interactional dynamics where everyone's improvising and something emerges from the performance that no one performer could have created alone or predicted even on their own. It's that improvisational emergence that I find particularly fascinating as a creativity researcher. So then when I started thinking about learning, teaching and learning for creativity, I was thinking of this metaphor, this model of learning as improvisational. But students have to be guided in their improvisations, in their active construction. Then they learn more effectively. Students have to be active learners, and they have to have the freedom to construct their own knowledge. But students do learn more effectively if they have guidance. And again, these are terms that most people in education will have encountered the concept of scaffolding before. So this is what happens in guided improvisation, where teachers are scaffolding students, but through a learning trajectory. And this concept of learning trajectory is important in learning sciences research. I don't know to what extent it's been used in practice, but it's the importance of guiding improvisation through this learning trajectory. So I popped up a graphic here where imagine the student starting at the top and going down to the bottom. And I think of this as a river, let's say, conceptual corridor, a fancy term. Let's say it's a river. So you're starting at the top. The learner has prior knowledge before entering the learning trajectory. A lot of learning sciences research tells us the importance of learners' existing knowledge before they enter the learning trajectory. And as they're passing down through the learning trajectory, these little blue hexagons are moments of stability, where they're landmarks, if you will, where you've you've constructed for yourself some portion of the conceptual understanding that I'm calling creative knowledge, but you haven't made it all the way yet. So those are like landmarks that you pass through. And the red explosions, whatever, those are failures, dead ends, obstacles. And even those can lead to effective learning. There's a body of research on what's called productive failure. So when you're mapping out this learning trajectory, which we do by engaging in research on children, how they learn in a given specific subject area, this involves a lot of research in specific topics and years You have a learning trajectory for learning fractions, right? There's a different learning trajectory for learning electromagnetism or whatever. So this is how you should be building your curriculum, to focus on active construction of learning, but guided through a kind of scaffolding that is based on research on what the optimal learning trajectory looks like. Now, from my perspective, as someone who studies improvisation, also outside of schooling, right? I study improv theater and jazz. So this is a great metaphor for me to think about that learning trajectory and the concept of scaffolding, because all improvisation takes place within guiding structures, right? Jazz musicians don't just go up there and start blowing their saxophone while the other people around them are hitting the drums, right? There's an incredible amount of structure that supports group improvisation. And this is a book that I edited that was published in 2011, Structure and Improvisation in Creative Teaching. So the teacher and the students together are engaging in a collaborative conversation. The interaction is not just the teacher guiding the students, but the teacher is participating in that collective improvisation. But the flow of the classroom is itself improvisational because the teacher and the students are building knowledge together. What that allows is for unexpected insights to emerge, right? Just like when an improv theater group gets up on stage, 5 minutes later, they have created a scenario that was not what they were predicting. They could not have predicted ahead of time. So if you can somehow bottle that in the classroom, right, where this happens with the teacher and the students together, that's going to result in creative knowledge, in deeper conceptual understanding, and the retention is great, right? You can apply that knowledge to new situations. It's flexible knowledge. You retain it, you understand it better. But some of you, if you're a teacher, you may already be thinking, this sounds very hard. And also it sounds like an opposition, right? Improvisation, structure, how do we resolve that paradox? We don't know what is the appropriate amount of structure versus improvisation. Well, I shouldn't say we, I mean, there researchers are studying that. I have some advice about that, but every classroom and every teacher and every subject is going to be a little bit different of a balance. So as a teacher, there's no rule book you can follow. You can't say on Tuesday, I'm going to have more structure, and on Wednesday, I'm going to have less structure, right? You have to teach in an improvisational fashion, and that's very hard to do. How do you know when the balance should change between structure and improvisation? You really can't plan it on Sunday night when you're getting your lesson plan ready for the rest, or Saturday and Sunday. However, how do you manage that uncertainty, right? That is incredibly stressful. It's very hard to do. Honestly, it takes experience and expertise. A lot of it is just learning by doing. So that's how we get to creative knowledge. And I'm zipping through a 100-page book I wrote, which is based on decades of research by hundreds of colleagues. But the core message is that you have to focus on what you want the students to learn, and that has to be creative knowledge, a certain kind of knowledge. Teaching creative knowledge requires a certain kind of pedagogy that I'm calling guided improvisation. This looks really different from what goes on in a lot of schools and a lot of classrooms. What has to change before we can have this type of guided improvisation going on in schools? And what has to happen before we can start teaching students creative knowledge instead of these isolated static facts and procedures? So as a learning scientist, I don't normally think about organizational dynamics. I'm not an educational leadership scholar. I'm not a management strategy person, but as a learning scientist, I know this research is so solid on what effective learning is and what effective teaching is. But then when we go look at schools, decade after decade, we've known about this research for quite some time, and too many schools are not changing. So I have to think about it, we're doing good research as learning scientists, as creativity researchers. Somehow our research is not making a difference. So what's going on? Should we shout louder about our research? Should we write more newspaper articles? Or is there something deeper and more fundamental that we're facing? And that's what I began to realize. There's something much bigger than just what goes on in the classroom between the walls. And it's about the system, the whole educational system. And I'm going to talk about the creative school as the summary of my talk. So how can we create a school that enables all of this type of pedagogy and knowledge to take place within a classroom? I don't think this isn't happening because teachers aren't good teachers. I don't think it's not happening because students don't want to learn creative knowledge. I think it's a bigger issue, and that's where I start talking about the system of the creative school. And now we get to those management consulting, organizational theory topics, which most learning scientists were cognitive psychologists, right? We don't really think about this stuff, but I felt forced to, if we want to go through this organizational transformation, what's it going to take? So I identified 4 characteristics that currently are blocking the implementation of creative classrooms, and that all 4 will have to change before we can have creative education that leads to creative knowledge: culture, leadership, organizational structure, and assessment and evaluation. So I'll start with culture. And there I'll say, really, everything goes back to this conception of knowledge, which I'm going to use that word again, epistemology. It's your conception of knowledge. In instructionism, your conception of knowledge is isolated and static facts and procedures. And it's a type of pedagogy that leads to students learning isolated static facts and procedures. They learn them, they forget them very quickly, they can't generalize them to other situations, but you could say in some sense they learn them. But this is the problem, is the conception of knowledge. But the culture problem is that everyone involved with schools is used to instructionism and they don't know it, right? People don't realize that they have a conception of knowledge that does not lead to ability to be creative, does not lead to deeper conceptual understanding. So many people think the problem is something else. They're not teaching the knowledge the right way. The students aren't studying the right way. The problem is the conception of knowledge. But students are used to it, right? Good students are good at learning in instructionism, well, who we call good students, right? They're good at acquiring these static facts and procedures. They're good at playing the game. The best students, the students we have at our universities, my students, University of North Carolina, or when I was at Washington University, I would ask these students, these are, 90th, 95th percentile students, and I would ask them, how many of you got an A in a class and forgot everything a month later? Raise your hands. Everybody in the class raises their hands. And these are like the top students in the country, right? They forget it right away. They know how to get an A. They're used to it. So when you introduce a new type of pedagogy, students are going to be uncomfortable. Parents are used to instructionism. When you introduce a new pedagogy, remember, they don't know about their conception of knowledge. That's something implicit. It's assumed. People don't talk about it. So when you introduce a new kind of pedagogy that is designed for a new conception of knowledge, people don't realize that that's what they're objecting to. They think that you're doing something else because it doesn't compute. So parents are used to instruction. Some students are used to it. So when they don't get it, what's wrong? They think it's bad pedagogy. They think my student's not being taught. My student's not learning because of, the stuff that you're doing. They don't know what creative knowledge is. District leaders and politicians. So this is what I mean by culture. It's the assumed things that people don't know they're assuming, right? They all share this conception of knowledge. They share a certain conception of what counts as good pedagogy. And when you try to change that, these are the powerful people, right? These are the people that are successful at doing school now. When you change this, they get uncomfortable because they know how to be successful this way. And they don't know what they're moving to, right? They don't know what creative knowledge is. They don't know what they're missing, I guess. So when I say culture, this is big. It's not just within the school, but it's everyone involved with education, which is basically our entire society. Okay, school leadership is the second one of my 4. And what we have in in most schools, and honestly in a lot of corporations as well, is a top-down style of leadership, which is focused on structure and control. And those forms of organizational structure are effective at efficiency, but they are inflexible. This is a large body of research on organizational innovation, the sort of stuff you get, I guess, in a business school or educational leadership researchers. And my own focus is on the importance of bottom-up distributed leadership, which actually is grounded in my own research on group improvisation. When you have improvisational dynamics within an organization, you have a kind of leadership that emerges from the bottom up. And sometimes it's called distributed leadership in the educational leadership research. It's based on collaboration, it's based on conversations, and what happens is that leadership forms emerge from practice, from action. That type of bottom-up distributed leadership is more effective at change, adaptability, and generating innovation. And it's more effective at supporting creative classrooms and this type of creative pedagogy. Okay, number 3 is the organizational structure. And I use this term in the sense that, again, like a business school person would use it. Imagine a corporation, right? You got the organizational chart mapped out on these 5 people report to that person, and these 5 people report to each of those 5 people, right? So that's what I mean by organizational structure. But I also mean the structure of the practices and activities that are involved in getting the work done, the core work of the organization. So you're structuring the relationships between people, and you're structuring the practices of everyone and how the practices of every employee interrelate with the practices of everyone else. In schools, this comes out in a lot of different ways, but it comes out in the schedule, it comes out in the curriculum. And by schedule and curriculum, I mean, we've got a very structured set of practices in schools, right? Students are changing classrooms, whatever your school is, every 40 minutes, they're all going to another classroom. Each classroom has a specific subject that's being taught. It's not a different subject. Well, now I'm talking about secondary school. I mean, the pieces that you have to fit together to make it all work, it's just phenomenal. You've got to have a top-down organizational structure because the system is so brittle and fragile. You can't change one thing without everything else changing. It's not just the leadership structure, it's the structure of the practices, even the physical spaces and the furniture. You've got 30 desks in a room, you've got a room that's just big enough for 30 students. What can you do with that, right? You can't tear down the building and build a new building. Corporations are actually experimenting with restructuring the nature of their workplace. And schools are actually just starting to do that, at least in higher education. We do have some very fascinating innovations with classroom design and architecture of new higher education buildings. There are higher education architecture firms who know about this research. All of these things are what I put in the grouping of organizational structure. And these are all things like culture and leadership that are designed now from history in ways that support instructionist pedagogy, but in ways that block a movement to creative teaching and learning. Then the 4th one is assessment. And again, I'll keep drilling it home. It's about this fancy word epistemology. It's about your conception of knowledge. Assessments today are based in an instructionist assumption of what knowledge is, static facts and procedures. And remember, on my 2nd slide of the talk, in instructionism, the way you assess is you just count up the number of facts and procedures that have been learned. The coverage trap is that now, if you've learned more facts and procedures, then you've learned more. And then your school has been a better school because it has transmitted more stuff to you. That's the coverage trap, because if that's your epistemology, if that's your conception of knowledge, then the way you want to improve your school is to teach more stuff and get more stuff into the kids' heads. And then if they demonstrate on a test, they've acquired more stuff. Now you know your school's better, right? That's the coverage trap. That will never lead to creative learning. And frankly, it will never lead to effective learning of anything. So this is learning sciences research. I'm going beyond creativity now to just basic understanding of any subject matter. You need to be assessing creative knowledge. And I'm not an assessment expert, but what little I've skimmed of the PISA, the college work readiness, the International Baccalaureate, I think they are steps in a much better direction than the types of assessments we're using in schools today. There are lots of challenges, and people always ask me this at the end of my talks, and these are big challenges, all four of these things, not just assessment. It's more expensive to assess creative knowledge. Just a back of the envelope, I'm coming up with 10 times or 20 times as expensive per student to use an assessment that actually does measure creative knowledge, 10 to 20 times more expensive. So, and I gotta say, there's no way around it. And then the challenge of avoiding the coverage trap. So you, school leader, you're innovative, you buy all my research, and you decide, I'm going to teach creative knowledge. I'm not going to worry about covering all this stuff. And who's going to call you and complain? It's going to be the parents. It's going to be the politicians. They're going to say you're dumbing down the curriculum. They're going to say our students aren't learning as much, right? So these are the features of a cultural model that block innovation and reform leading to a creative school. So gosh, now here I am at the end of the fourth one, and I feel like I've been maybe more pessimistic than I want to be. I mean, it is a challenge to go through this organizational transformation of these four things, and they all interlock, so they support each other. But what we need is we need a school where they all are transformed and they interlock in a way that now supports the creative classroom. And I think our research shows us how to do that. I'm optimistic that we're going to get there. And I think to do it is going to require everyone in the schools, especially the instructors. We need the teachers, because in innovative organizations, in management research, we know that in innovative organizations that can change, the professionals are continually learning, they work collaboratively, they engage in a kind of mutual tinkering where the small sparks add up to big ideas, and they're changing teams and assignments and organizations. So in an innovative organization, we have a lot of research showing what that would look like, but all of the research shows that change has to come from the bottom up, right? The change has to come from the people in the organization. It really doesn't work to have a CEO come in and just order everybody around in a different kind of way, right? Lasting change has to come from the bottom up. And in an organizational structure, the people in the organization are the teachers. So that's what we need. If we want to make that transformation, we have to enlist the creativity of the teachers, bringing them together in certain ways where they can collectively accomplish change in the organization. So it's going to require everyone in the organization, especially the teachers, the people who really know what a creative classroom looks like. Okay, final slide, take home message. Creativity is more important to our students and our society than at any time in history. Our research shows us how to give students that kind of knowledge, the kind of knowledge that's required in the 21st century. And it's with teachers and students collaborating in creating knowledge together in this kind of collective knowledge construction that I call guided improvisation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sawyer. Wonderful presentation. And we have so many questions, but before we jump into those questions, because I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer all of them, I wanted to take a moment to plug Dr. Sawyer's book, or several books that he has written. And so with us, we have Mary Meyer, who's going to share with you about our unique virtual book signing opportunity today. And once she's finished, then we'll start off with the questions that we have in the chat. And then if there are any more, we can continue on. So Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. As Alina mentioned, my name is Mary Meyer, and I work for Barnes & Noble across the San Diego region. It's always such an honor to partner with the Jacobs Institute and to be able to host this virtual book signing for Dr. Sawyer. After the event, Alina will be sending you an order form that features 3 of the titles that Dr. Sawyer has written. And then with each order, you'll receive an autographed copy with special event pricing and complimentary shipping included. So the first title is The Creative Classroom, and this is the one that he started the event with. It's The Creative Classroom, Innovative Teaching for 21st Century Learners. And this book really shows how teachers and school leaders can work together to overcome barriers to creative teaching. It also discusses that concept of guided improvisation in teaching. The second title is Group Genius, The Creative Power of Collaboration. And this book shares really compelling stories of inventions and research, along with ways that we can be more creative in group settings. And this includes some of that jazz and improv work that he was speaking about as well. And then the third title is my personal favorite. This is called Zigzag, The Surprising Path to Greater Creativity. And this book really explores how creativity, it doesn't come in this fully realized burst of inspiration, but it really comes in bits and pieces, or zigs and zags. And this book includes a really practical 8-step program, as well as over 100 hands-on activities to help achieve greater creativity. So this one I am reading right now and really enjoy. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out directly to me. My contact information will be listed on the order form as well. And thank you again so much to the Jacobs Institute for hosting this event and your whole summer learning series, and to Dr. Keith Sawyer for sharing all of your meaningful work with us.
Thank you so much, Mary. And as I mentioned, we will be giving away 2 books, compliments of Barnes and Noble. So thank you, Mary, for arranging that. And we will be sharing this information following this webinar. So now we're going to jump into those questions. So starting with the very first one, Dr. Sawyer, there's a question about creativity itself. It says, by creativity, and this is from Gail, by creativity, do you mean thinking for yourself?
Oh, that's a great question. Always a challenge to define creativity. And I'm a creativity researcher. I wrote the college textbook for the psychology of creativity, and even I have trouble defining creativity. I mean, the classic definition is to come up with something new and different that is also useful in some way, or it's appropriate to furthering the values of some community, which means if you just have a crazy dream one night, that wouldn't fit the definition of creativity. And I think that's fair. I think that creativity actually is recognized in some way by someone as making a difference in the world. So yeah, I'd say new and different, but also in some way useful or appropriate for somebody.
Awesome. Well, there's another question from Dr. Lisa Dolly. Is the improvisation a form of serendipitous learning experience?
Right. So yeah, it's a definitional depending on how you define improvisation and serendipity. But yes, I love the word serendipity, and I talk about where it came from in my book, Zigzag. So look it up there, and in Group Genius. But yes, when people are improvising together, the power of collaborative improvisation is that someone else will do something that you weren't expecting. And then it prompts a new thought or a connection that you wouldn't have thought of on your own. So when I play music, I really only enjoy improvising in a band with other musicians. I don't sit at home and improvise because then I'm stuck in my own head, right? So it's the collective improvisation with other people that leads you to be more creative than you would by yourself.
Wonderful. There's a follow-up from Lisa as well. It says, does that work in organizational settings as well? Now, Lisa, you may have to refresh our memories. Are you referring to improvisation, or what?
Well, I think he went on to answer that question by talking about the culture of schools. So I think that question was answered.
Okay, awesome, wonderful. Well, we have another question from Gail. What assessment do you use to measure creative knowledge?
Well, again, I would say starting with epistemology, right? So how would you define characterize the type of knowledge that is going to support creative thinking and creative behavior in an area? So I'm calling that creative knowledge, and it has these, broadly speaking, the characteristics I mentioned of being deeper conceptual understanding, of being bigger chunks of knowledge altogether instead of tiny isolated ones, of being more easily connected with other chunks of big knowledge. So all of those things are features of creative knowledge. Now, to assess them, you can't just have a paper and pencil test, right? A multiple choice exam, because it's not a tiny thing. Small knowledge you can assess with a simple question because it's a tiny little thing. You can find out if someone knows that tiny little thing fairly easily. But creative knowledge is a big, complicated thing. So it's not going to show up on one page of a test. It's big. So it costs more money. So I don't think I've given a specific answer to the question, except to tell you what the challenges are.
Do you have an example of, you're saying creative knowledge is big. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, okay, I'll give you a story. Okay, it's about, I won't say who, but a child in my family. And I was assisting this person in learning math, it was, I think, third grade. And this person was not good at math. Okay, and I don't want to embarrass them, but I'll say this person was not good at math. So, and my wife's not good at math, so I was the one helping. So first there was a unit on fractions, right? Adding fractions, multiplying fractions. And you learn the procedures for multiplying two fractions, and then you do a worksheet of 30 problems. And okay, yep, you got all 30 right. Now you know how to multiply fractions. Then the next unit is percentages, 30%, 50%. So there's a worksheet of 30 problems of multiplying percentages. Okay, you got all those right. Now you understand percentages. And then it was ratios, or right, and decimals. And at the end of 2 months of doing this, and I made some offhand comment like, of course, these are all three the same thing. And this third grader looked at me with a puzzled look and said, what do you mean they're the same thing? I was like, fractions, decimals, ratios, they're all the same thing. And she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So that's the shallow knowledge, is knowing that procedure for multiplying two fractions. The deep, big knowledge is understanding what a fraction is, and that it's really the same thing as a decimal or a ratio or a percentage. So it's a simple story, but that's big knowledge, understanding proportions. It's not that big, right? But it's bigger than knowing how to multiply two fractions.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. We have a couple of more questions. One from Victoria. Since teachers are often caught in the cycle of teaching how they were taught when they were younger, what is the best approach to break the cycle of instructionalism? Sometimes, even when we have buy-in, individuals are uncertain how to get started.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, because we've had instructionism for more than one generation. So all of us who are teachers were taught that way. I know I was taught that way. I forgot everything I learned a month after the semester was over, just like everybody else. But if you haven't seen effective pedagogy, it really does help to have some models. So yeah, I think learning about it just from reading my book, that's not good enough. Yeah, in terms of how you would educate the next generation of teachers, I don't have the expertise to design teacher professional development. But yes, I do agree that that's a challenge. I said it was a cultural model, instructionism. A cultural model, and a core feature of a cultural model is it's just something you take for granted. It's just something you assume, and everyone around you assumes the same thing. You don't ever talk about it, but it's just what everyone somehow knows to be true. And that's the characteristics of instructionism. You don't even know that you believe it because you don't know anything else. So I think part of the awareness is just, I don't know, maybe I go talk to more people or my colleagues just to sort of say, look, this thing that you're all doing, you may not realize what you're doing, but you're making these assumptions. that are tying you to a certain form of pedagogy. And here's what the research is showing.
Wonderful. And we have one more question from Deborah. It says, can creative mean being able to apply concepts? In other words, if I bring in an article for them to apply the concepts they have read about in the textbook, is this creative? Or can I ask them about the pros and cons of the concepts? I do have activities as well, but wondered whether some of these things are creative. And then there's my students write answers for their groups on the board so we can discuss them as a class.
Great. No, I can tell you're a great teacher. All those things I completely support. And you use the term concept, which is important because conceptual understanding is almost like a synonym for creative knowledge, is this deeper conceptual understanding. And that's what a lot of my learning sciences colleagues will call it. They'll call it deeper conceptual understanding. So yes, I would say a concept almost by definition is a bigger form of knowledge. A concept isn't a tiny piece of knowledge that you can memorize. So yes, if the students are learning concepts, if they're applying concepts, absolutely, that's what I'm talking about.
Wonderful. I'm going to stop the recording now, but if you have any additional questions, please feel free to hang on for just a few minutes and you can ask them. You can turn off your mute and you can ask them yourselves, or you can continue to type them in the chat. But thank you so much for attending.